Good evening. I do want to plug our tent meeting in October the 18th. Make you a note, October the 18th through the 22nd. We're really excited about it. I think it's going to be great. It's at the Jasper Mall parking lot, as he said. Hadn't been a tent meeting in a long time. We've got a tent big enough. We've got 500 chairs rented. We've got an overflow space. I think we can have 1,000 people. We're excited about it. So y'all come, be planning it, be willing to support it, and it'll be a great thing for this community. This is not a Liberty thing. This is a kingdom thing. It's not directed at one congregation. We're just hoping the kingdom will grow. I do appreciate you having me here tonight. This is not really my thing, but I'll do the best I can. I'm not a preacher by no means. Me and Robert consider ourselves evangelists, and but sometimes we do this. I've had a stopped up head and sore throat last night and today, not contagious, just some atmosphere changes and weather changes when we've been out of state. But bear with me if you will. For the last few weeks, you've been studying about the promises of God. I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I appreciate promises that can actually be trusted. Because we live in a world that's full of promises that don't always meet our expectations. In fact, that very thing happened to me and my family last week while we were in Utah. My secretary had booked us an Airbnb while I was working in Utah, and my family went out with me, and they were going to explore some national parks. The pictures of this Airbnb look great online. I don't know if you've ever noticed or not how photographers can almost perform miracles. I really think that should be right up there with the spiritual gifts. Maybe in 1 Corinthians, maybe between prophecy and speaking in tongues, people that do, I'm kidding, but people that do really good photography, they can hide a lot of stuff. This place in the pictures looked like its name. The name of this house was A Nice Little House. And the pictures we saw, I thought, man, that's exactly what it is. That's a nice little house. And it's located in the Great Basin, which is a desert area. There is a little river, but any crops they grow is irrigated. They don't have any rainfall. But this particular house advertised to be by a lake. And I thought, well, that'll be perfect for us. When we got there, it was an old double wide. Nothing wrong with a double wide at all, except this one looked like it had survived several different administrations. Also, it wasn't by a lake. It was beside a road that went to a lake, but that's about the only thing that the two had in common. When we pulled up to the house, you'd notice right away there's a camera on the front porch. And it started following us as we was unloading the car. And it followed us from the car to the house, up in the house. Then it had another one in the back. As you went around the house, had another camera to follow you. And at one point, it started talking to David, one of my sons. The owner started talking to him through the camera. That got weird really quick. Me and Aaron went in the house, and I thought, I wonder how many cameras are in here. Then my family sat down on the couch, my three boys did, rested just a minute, and all of a sudden they were covered with ants. Why is there ants in the couch? Because somebody left a bag of Cheetos in the cushions. So we got the Cheetos out of the cushions and got the ants out the best we could, and then we went in the bathroom. And they had a garden tub. And around this garden tub was pink shag carpet. Brethren, there were pink carpet around the tub. There's some decorations that should be left in the 70s. But they were so proud of this pink carpet, they had it in one hallway, and they had a rug runner covering it up. And you know how it scoots across the car? It was mashed up against the wall. They didn't even get it straightened out. Me and Erin talked about it, and we thought, well, she's going to be gone all day. There wasn't much available because they was filming The Chosen in that area at this time, so we were just limited on where we could stay. And we talked about it, and they're going to be going to parks. I'm going to be working all day, and we thought we can make it. We can get by. That night we slept on the bed, not in it. And we made up our mind that's just what we would do. But the final straw for me was when I went to the air conditioner. It was hot, and I thought, I got to turn the air down. And when I looked at the thermostat, written on the thermostat in a black Sharpie were these words: do not turn the AC below 75 or it will trip. I don't like 75. I get in trouble at Liberty because when I get up to teach, the first thing I do is turn the air down. 75 is not air conditioned, that's slower heat to me. The house was 85. I was burning up already, so it wasn't keeping up. And I thought, we cook barbecue at a little bit higher temperature than this. I cannot stay in it. The temperature working out in the basin during the day was 100 or above. And I thought, I'm not coming into an 85-degree house at night that I'm paying for. Why do I share this story with you? Because sometimes promises don't match reality, right? Sometimes advertisements promise things and they fail. Sometimes people promise things and they fail also. Sometimes companies like Airbnb will promise certain things and it fails. But let me tell you, when God makes a promise, He keeps it. You can count on God's promises to be true. And tonight we're going to study one of God's promises, that He promises to send messengers to the lost. One reason that many of us are Christians here tonight is because God kept that promise. He sent somebody to you or to your family that taught us the gospel. Our key text tonight comes from Acts chapter 22, verse 21. Paul, in his defense to the Jews, tells about his conversion to Christ. And he said, Jesus told me to leave, to depart, for I will send you far away or hence to the Gentiles. And then Acts 28:28, read it just a minute ago. It said, be known therefore unto you that the salvation of God is sent to the Gentiles, and they will hear it. Let me ask you something as we get started. When you think about God, when I mention God, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Probably me, the first thing I think about is just how awesome He is, His power. And I don't know about y'all, but I think about God's awesome power. But maybe you think about God's holiness. Maybe you think about God's love. Maybe His mercy. We sing a lot of times about His amazing grace. Or maybe you think about God's justice. All those are true. But I'm so glad this topic come up, Joey, because I've been studying it ever since you give it to me a long time ago. It's changed a lot since then. But if we follow the story of Scripture from Genesis all the way to Revelation, we find another truth about God. God's always been a sending God. That's the theme of the Bible. God has been a sending God. You think about Noah. God sent Noah to warn the world that a flood was coming. You think about Moses. God sent Moses down to Egypt. God sent the prophets to Israel to warn them of their coming destruction if they didn't change. God sent Jonah to warn Nineveh. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4 said that in the fullness of time, in other words, when the time was just right, God sent His Son into the world. Jesus sent the apostles. The Holy Spirit sent Paul and Barnabas. In many ways, the Bible is a story of God sending people chasing after lost people. Sometimes when we hear a lesson like this, I know our first thought goes to missionaries. But tonight I want you to understand something. Every Christian in some way is called to carry the message of Christ to other people. If you're like me, I know you've heard plenty of lessons on this topic. And I hope before you shut me out tonight, and I only say that because I've been there and I did the same thing, but I hope before you shut me out that you'll understand one thing. I'm not here to place another burden on your shoulders tonight. Most Christians already know that they're to carry the gospel to other people. What I'm here to do in some way is to encourage you. I'm here to encourage all of us together. I asked Joey what he had in mind, and I hope I'm going along with his idea, but I'm simply here to tell you what God has done in our life. And I hope by telling you this, maybe it'll help you in yours. Because I've learned that God still opens doors. And God still uses ordinary people. In fact, I didn't always understand this. He says back in 2015 that something changed with me and my wife. We realized we'd spent years talking about evangelism, and we did very little about it. So we made a simple decision. We told each other we were going to pray for opportunities. We told each other we were going to pray to be able to see those opportunities when they come about, because that's really important. Sometimes I think there's opportunities we just miss because we're not looking. But we prayed that we'd see those opportunities. And if God gave us one, we would commit to taking it. And then we made a promise to each other that we would hold each other accountable. That's pretty simple. But we made a verbal commitment. I'm not a preacher. She's not either. We didn't have any great plan. We didn't have any grand program that we were going to use. We just simply decided to start studying the Bible with people. And it wasn't long before God began opening doors for us. Before long, we had a community Bible study in our hangar there at the house. It started with four of us on Friday nights. First night we met, she got Jack's chicken fingers. And we sat down and began studying in Genesis. It wasn't long that study grew to almost 40 people. These were unchurched people. These were people who had fallen away. People who were church hurt. People who may be scared to go to church, but they would come to this Bible study at a neutral place. Over the next year of this study, 7 souls were baptized into Christ in our swimming pool. This study continued until COVID stopped it. But even then, God wasn't finished opening doors. This study eventually restarted, and we had a lot of new opportunities that come through the Drummond Bible study that he talked about in Piney Woods. It's still going today with the help of Robert Youngblood, Chris Teeter. My mother teaches the kids in class, and several others have pitched in just to help. That's another thing I've figured out. When you determine to do the work, help will come. God provides help. But looking back, I've learned another important truth. God don't always ask us to create opportunities, but He does ask us to be available when He provides them. God will provide the opportunities if we're looking. One of the greatest examples of this happened in 2022. A company I contract for, I got to remember to keep an eye on the clock. I'm sorry, you'll have to stop me if I get too long. A company I contract for had asked me to go to Utah to build a gypsum dewatering plant at a powerhouse. The job was supposed to take about 2.5 months. I work out of town a lot, but I don't work across the country. So there was no way I was going to leave my family for that long to go that far to work. So I declined. 2 weeks later, they come back. They asked me if I'd reconsider. The time schedule they was on, what they was needing to do, they wanted somebody that was familiar with it to do it, and they thought it'd be cheaper. And I said, I'll go under one condition. If my family can go with me. You see, if they go, that means there's going to be more money for some kind of room. There's going to be more money for airlines. There's going to be more money for a rental car. There's going to be more money for food. And I wasn't going to have them sit in with nothing to do. There would have to be money provided for them to do things. To my surprise, they agreed. So before we left on our trip to Utah, we prayed that we would have a safe trip, but we also prayed that God would use us somehow if we were out there. I still remember going up in our Bible study room that we built, that we eventually had those studies in at the hangar, and getting a stack of Back to the Bible booklets, taking them out to my truck and putting them in the console. We packed our stuff up and we headed west. The trip was about 28 hours. Little did we know, God had already been opening doors. You see, the job site was in the Great Basin. It's about 2.5 hours south of Salt Lake City. There's a little reservoir close to that area, but it's desert. It gets really cold in the winter, it gets really hot in the summer, and you don't grow anything unless you water it. For the first week, we searched online trying to find somewhere that we could worship. We didn't find anything. The closest thing we found was in Salt Lake City, so we drove 2.5 hours to Salt Lake City to worship. The next week, I went to the little town of Delta to eat lunch. A little place called Ashton's Farms Burger Barn and Meat Joint. I don't know. It's a pretty cool place because when you walk in, they got a half a side of beef and pork hanging up, and they're cutting it all up. And they're selling meat, but they also have a hamburger joint in there with it. So your meat's fresh, but it's a little different take on where you eat lunch. When I walked outside of that restaurant that day to go back to the plant, I happened to look to my left, and I don't think you can really see it there, but that's what I saw, and I could see it a little better without the picture. That building down there, I could see a sign, and I thought I could see what it said, but I wasn't sure. So when I pulled out of the parking lot, I turned left, and it said the Great Basin Church of Christ. I said, man, this wasn't advertised on nothing. It ain't on Facebook. It ain't on Google Maps. It's not on maps. There's not a website. It was not known. I immediately got excited. I called Erin and told her, and the next Sunday morning we went there. There were 6 members present, not counting us. You see 5 of them. There was a lady to the right. One man led the singing. He led the prayers, and he read a sermon from a book. But those people were some of the kindest people you could ever meet. And I'm sorry, but it's been good for me, Joey, to go back over this because it still gives me chills talking about these people. I remember thinking, man, how in the world do these people make it out here in Mormon country? With only 6 members, how are they paying their bills? How do they stay here and stay faithful? So after service, I met with a preacher that said he wasn't a preacher. He was just doing the best he could. And I said, I'd like to meet with you and talk to you about the church. Can we meet for lunch one day? And we agreed. So we met at a little place in town, and maybe you'll understand what kind of town we're talking about. It's called the Rancher Hotel and Cafe. You go back in time. So we met at this Rancher restaurant, and we were sitting in a booth, and he told me the history of the church. And I said, is there anybody here that we could study the Bible with? Would anybody be interested in Bible studies? And he said, I don't know, I'll ask, but there wasn't no interest, I could tell. And I thought, man, I'm finally in a place where God could use me maybe, and they're not interested. I told him, I said, man, I'm going to be here for 2 months. I want to help any way I can. The next Saturday, he called me. I still remember where I was in that condo when the phone rung. And I answered, and he said, hey, brother, I know how you can help. I said, great. What can I do for you? He said, you can preach tomorrow. I said, how about finding another way I can help and call me back? I don't preach, I teach. I've never preached before in my life. But he kept encouraging me. And he finally talked me into it. So for the next 2 months, my wife made that picture. We didn't know we would be showing it. For the next 2 months, I preached at that little congregation. Still asking people would they be interested in Bible studies. They didn't have a midweek Bible study. They didn't have a Sunday afternoon. Didn't have a Bible class. They met one time in the morning. I said, let's get together during the week and have a Bible study. Nobody was interested. So during the last week that I was there, I've been there for 2 months, I was supposed to leave. And before I got up to preach, a young lady walked in and sat down on the back row. And while I was up preaching, she started crying. I was pretty distracted, but after services, I went back and spoke with her. And I said, I didn't know if she'd come here before. I hadn't seen her in 2 months, but maybe she'd been here. I said, do you worship here? And she said, no. She said, I've never been here before. I said, what brings you here? She said, I don't know. She said, I feel like God was bringing me to this place. She said, I've made a lot of bad decisions. I messed up pretty bad, and I've caused harm to my family. And I just come here today looking for something. And she said, before I walked in that door, I prayed a prayer, and I said, God, please don't let me be distracted by the music. She said, I come in here, y'all didn't have the first instrument. She said, I could sing to God with all my heart, with no distractions. And she said, emotions overcome me. I said, would you like to have a Bible study? Nobody else does. She said, I would love to have a Bible study. So I set it up for Monday night. I called the preacher. I said, hey, I'm meeting with not a strange woman, but a woman, ever how you would say it. I'm meeting with a woman. I don't need to meet with her by myself. Could y'all come with me for a Bible study? That first study, the whole congregation come, all 6 of them. There's a couple not in there, but they're busy in the kitchen. We sat down and we studied with that lady that night. And we would start at 6 o'clock and we wouldn't be done to 10 or 11 o'clock at night. The next night, a couple of them brought a couple of more people with them. The next night, they brought another 1 or 2. By the time Friday night come, we had almost 20 people gathered together in a Bible study. People just saying, hey, come to our friend. I'm like, I've been telling y'all for 2 months. They said, this is so fun. I said, why ain't we been doing it? They said, we didn't know what you was talking about. See, there's a language barrier. They don't understand "runt." That means it's ruined, past ruined, right? They're like, we don't know what you mean. If you say ill, they don't understand. They think you're sick. I'm like, no, I'm ill. Leave me alone. I'm not sick. I'm mad. There's several things, but they didn't understand Bible study. I don't know why, but it was just a language barrier. They didn't know, what are we going to study? They were so excited to be studying the Bible. And they were bringing people, and I didn't get a picture of the Friday night crowd because we got interrupted, but Friday night at midnight, we baptized 2 people into Christ. The temperature was in the teens by midnight that night. They filled the baptistry up with 2 hoses hooked to the spigots outside, so if you wonder her expression, you'll probably get a pretty good idea. It was cold. The next morning, I got a call from a young lady. And she said, hey, I've been thinking about our study all night. And she said, I want to be baptized now. I said, that's great. Let's meet at the building. She said, no, I want to be baptized at the res. I don't know about y'all, but see, I grew up watching cowboys and Indians. And my impression of Indians wasn't good. I always thought they was mean. They would scalp you. We even run into a Navajo reservation. I had a bad experience with a real-time Navajo Indian, and not to scalp me or nothing. He didn't understand me maybe. I thought Indians were bad growing up, but I didn't know how bad we were to Indians, right? I think that was meant to be that way. But I told her, I'm like, hey, I don't know about going to the reservation. Them people may not be friendly. And she laughed and she said, I'm not talking about the reservation. I'm talking about the reservoir, the lake that I was calling it earlier. Was the reservoir where all the snow melt gathers, and that's their water for the year. Again, It's March. It's in the teens, and whatever snow melt comes down the mountain into this reservoir, so it's cold too. So the next morning we met at the res, and I encouraged Sean Work to baptize her, not because I was scared of getting in the cold water, but I said, you need to know how to do this. He said, no, I'm not comfortable. I've never done it. And I said, it's a great time to learn because this is something that'll happen. He finally agreed. He baptized her. He actually did it twice because her foot come up. So we got practice. A year later, I went back thinking I was going to make some adjustments on the plant. When the church found out we were coming, they were excited and they lined people up for Bible studies again. You see, me and Aaron had been sending house to house, heart to heart to that little Mormon city for a year. Right after we left, we was trying to find a way to help, so we started sending house to house. These people have been receiving them, and we had doubts sometime whether to keep it up because we hadn't heard nothing. And a lady from that city had been receiving these brochures. She had come from Ohio when she was 12 or 13. She'd been married for 45 years. And her husband had converted her to the Mormon religion 40 years ago. And she said, I always felt like it wasn't right. Something didn't feel right. And she said, I got this brochure in the mail. And she said, this is the church I was looking for. This church feels right. So we studied with her and another man that was from Louisiana. He had come to the little bitty town of Delta in the desert to work in the same powerhouse that I was working in. And somebody had seen him at the Ford dealership and asked him to come to church, and he did. So we had a study with him and her. During that study, she saw the need that she wanted to be baptized and she wanted to be part of the Church of Christ. He wasn't quite ready. He still needed to study some more, but she said, I want to be baptized into Christ. She said, I'm going to go home and get my clothes and I'll be right back. Her husband came back with her. He was a Mormon. She sat down in front of me. He stood behind me for a minute. And he said, I want to know what position you hold. I said, I'm a Christian. He said, well, you're not worthy to baptize my wife because you have to be a bishop in the LDS church to baptize. I said, if you'll sit down, we'll study. He sat down, but he didn't listen to our study. The most nervous I've ever been in a study was with this man standing behind me. What time are we supposed to finish? Oh, man, already? We baptized this lady. You can see her husband's head watching. The next week, she brought members from her family to church along with her husband. 3 months later, I go back. The man from Louisiana, well, I'll tell you this story. After that guy watched her be baptized and come back the next week, I went to his farm the next week, me and the boys, just to make friends, and we hit it off. He liked me now. We become friends, and I told him I wanted to buy a bale of hay from him. He sold alfalfa hay, $300 a bale. I said, if you can put it in my tool trailer, I'll take it home. He put it in my tool trailer, but he wouldn't let me buy it. But see, I didn't need a bale of hay. I needed a relationship with somebody. I left, had 2 blowouts going home. That don't count. 3 months later, I come back. That's John from Louisiana that studied with us, was baptized also. You see, Something I've thought about many times is, what if I'd refused to go? What if we hadn't have prayed for opportunities? What if we hadn't have gone looking for souls? What if fear would have won over and I wouldn't have spoke and the Bible studies wouldn't have started? Real faith will make you uncomfortable. Real faith will put you out of your comfort zone. If you're not pushed out of your comfort zone, you're not living up to your true faith. A working faith will also make those around you uncomfortable also. Sometimes seeing somebody else willing to step out on faith is a powerful motivator. It's a powerful testimony. Sometimes, my point, God sends preachers across the ocean, but sometimes He sends construction workers to Utah. I ain't qualified. I'm not a preacher. But God used us. You know, God's always used ordinary people. Moses argued with God because he couldn't speak, and I'm like, I get it. I can't speak either. You probably think if you'd shut up, we could start class. Gideon, you know, he said, I'm the smallest tribe. I'm the smallest family, God. Jeremiah said, I'm way too young. And don't use me. Peter denied Christ. Paul persecuted Christians. Jonah just up and run away. He said, I ain't going to do it. One of the saddest things in the world is when we assume that people are unreachable. We went back this year, and I'm finishing up. We went back this year, I thought, to tear some of this equipment out, and that's what we did. Again, when the church found out we were coming back, they lined up more Bible studies. Pattern. I said, hey, why don't y'all go ahead and start studying with them before we get there? A young lady from Minnesota come to work on a horse ranch and showed up at church one day, out of the blue, if you want to call it. I don't believe in chance. A week before we come, Sean calls me and he says, hey, we're fixing to baptize Clara. Tell me what I'm supposed to say again. One of the studies we had last week was a young lady who I did a goofy video with, young Mormon lady. And she said, she didn't say, I like the way y'all talk. She said, I like the way you guys talk. That's hard for me to say. I said, ma'am, if you would like to hear us talk, if you'll come to Bible study, you can listen to me talk for 2 hours. She come to Bible study. This guy on the end, Stone, called me a few minutes ago. He had to go back to his home. He lived up north, and he called me and said, hey, I got my grandmother here. Tell me about those verses we talked about baptism. Charles got on the bus. We're having a Bible study with his grandmother over the telephone. The man that was upset for me baptizing his wife come to church Sunday when we were there when I was preaching. I said, man, has he been coming? They said, no, he ain't been in 3 years. Church was over. He come up to me and said, I'm only here because y'all were here. But a Bible study on Thursday night. This time he come back and he was interested. Not baptized, but we made a start. Sometimes evangelism looks like a bale of hay. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it starts with a question. Philip said, hey, do you understand what you're reading? Samaritan woman said, hey, come see a man. Sometimes evangelism can be really simple. Please don't overcomplicate it. You know, God could have did things different. Every morning we could wake up and God could teach the gospel every morning. He could put a picture in the sky of Jesus Christ on the cross. And we could see that every morning. And right beside it, He could put a picture of Jesus Christ in the tomb. And we could see that right beside it. And then He could have a picture beside it of Jesus standing there risen with His hands out, with holes in His hands and holes in His feet and a hole in His side. And we could look at that every morning and say, there's the gospel, and what a powerful motivator that would be. But He didn't do that. God could have sent angels to preach every sermon that's preached. Can you imagine what a sermon from the archangel Michael would sound like? You think about people coming forward. Gabriel, He could have sent Gabriel to preach, but He didn't do that. He sent us, people. And there's not a plan B. Thank you for your time. You may not want me to say nothing during the invitation part.
Sing 513, Standing on the Promises, is our invitation song. We thank you, Brandon. That's powerful for us to learn from, and we're grateful for your heart and for these tremendous actions. We're going to turn things back over again to Brandon as he extends the Lord's invitation for us tonight. We'll sing that song as he does.